بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. الحمد لله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. رمضان مبارك إن شاء الله. اللهم نسألك اللطف والفتح والتسديد، ونسألك أن تجعل أعمالنا مباركة ومقبولة لديك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلي اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. So continuing on, inshallah, we've been looking at Ibn Juzayy al-Kalbi's work on the major themes of the Quran and the structure of the Quran. We covered the aspect of the stories and the importance of the stories, and then also the nature of repetition in the Quran. That very often the repetition is to display the prowess, the elegance, the eloquence and bayan of the Quran. And then now we're going to look at what he argues are the 12 sciences that are necessary for a mufassir. And there's different types of tafsir, but all of the mufassirun, the people, these are called exegetes, the people of exegesis. These people have to master a certain number of sciences in order for them to be able to interpret the Quran soundly and be protected from error. One of the most interesting things I think about deviant groups in our tradition, every single one of them without exception almost, goes astray based on language, on lugha, and on misinterpretations. And usually it's rhetorical, it's from balagha. It's actually not understanding the rhetorical nature of the Quran. The other problem is that they go astray from not having a comprehensive perspective, because you can see one thing and think you're convinced of its truth, but then there's something else that like the poet said, لَقَدْ حَفِظْتَ شَيْئًا وَغَابَتْ عَنْكَ أَشْيَاءُ. You know something, but there are a lot of things you don't know. So Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya once said to me that this religion needs ilm kabir. That's how he described it. It needs a vast knowledge for scholarship. The scholars are of varying degrees. So you have at the lowest level, you have people that are called wa'al, like the wa'il. The wa'il is somebody like a preacher, and they have a level of scholarship. I mean, they have to, or they can't do that. Very often, they memorize the Quran or large parts of it. They memorize some hadiths. They have studied some fiqh, even if it's basic fiqh. So there's a level, but it's not a high level. And very often, they can get into trouble because the common people who aren't able to distinguish between the levels of scholarship, they might see this person because he speaks Fusha, and the Ammi, the common person, he doesn't speak Fusha, so he thinks, the Sheikh really knows. And I'll give you one example. I was once, when I was in the Emirates studying, there was a mufti I used to visit a lot, and I'd sit with him, and I studied with him, Sheikh Abdullah al-Siddiq. He was a student of Sheikh Muhammad al-Amin al-Shinqiti. He was a brilliant scholar, and just a vast erudition and a phenomenal memory, and knew a lot about a lot of things. I mean, I was once asked about the American court system, and I started explaining to him, and then he corrected me, because he talked about the 9 district courts and how the Supreme Court worked. And I mean, I was like 19 or 20, but I mean, that was the type level of knowledge he had. So we were there, and these 2 people, I won't say from which country, but it was from an Arab country. They came in for a fatwa, and they asked him a question, and it was relatively straightforward, but he delved deeper into it, and then he said, "Come back tomorrow, and I'll give you the answer." And I'll never forget this. The man turned to me, because I was there with the sheikh, and he said, "Da bi'araf haga?" Like, does he know anything? Like, he just couldn't understand why he wasn't giving him an immediate answer. But this man had an immense amount of wara', just scrupulousness. And that's how he was. And so the common person will think, if you're not quick to answer, you don't know anything. Whereas scholars will actually appreciate a scholar who deliberates, because the Prophet ﷺ said that deliberation is extremely important and a quality that Allah loves. And so the second level is the ulama, after the while. These are people that really have mastered sciences, and then they go into specialization very often, but they have a comprehensive knowledge of the deen, and they get that status of being an alim. And then there's tafawut amongst them. There's the greats and in every generation there will be a handful of them. And then there's people that are just well-versed. And then you have the hukam. And these are people that have ulil amri. So they have a level of authority over us. أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم. Obey Allah and obey the Messenger, and those who are in authority over you. And then you have the anbiya. So Imam Raghib al-Asbahani, in his Dhari'a, he has a beautiful book called Dhari'a ila Makarim al-Sharia. And he mentions in there that the most important thing for a government, أوجب الواجبات على الحكومات مراعاة المتصدين للعلم, is to regulate who takes religious leadership in a society. And this is something that happened, for instance, Nizam al-Mulk is a good example of that, who was a minister during the Mamluk period and was very concerned about the religious anarchy. And so he was finding the right people, and he found Imam al-Ghazali and set him up in the Nizamiyya. But the reason he said that is because the prophets controlled the inner and the outer. They control the inner and the outer of the khasa and the amma. So they control the inner states, the bawatin, of the khasa and the amma, of the common people and the elect people, and then they control the outer states. That's the prophets. They're the only ones that have that. The sultan controls the outer states of people. Like right now, we're all under house arrest because the sultan is saying, stay in your homes. So they control our outward. We might disagree with it. And if we oppose them, we might face the consequences, but they don't control our inward state. They only control our outward state. I mean, they try to control the inward state by propaganda and, all these, psy wars, psyops, psychological operations and things like that. But they really don't control our inward. And then the hukama, these are the sagely scholars who control the bawatin of the khasa. They control the inward states of the elect. So these are people that have an immense impact on our thinking, like somebody like Sayyidina Naqib al-Atas, who will influence people through his writing. He'll influence how you perceive the world, or Imam al-Ghazali, somebody like that. And then you have the wa'ad, who control the inward of the common people. That's why they are the most dangerous people. So if they're not, and what he says is the rulers have to be guided by the hukama, right, to be in good condition, and the wa'ad has to be guided by the hukama. So the hukama are very important people, the elders. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ said, "Laysa minna man la yuwaqqir kabirana." He's not from us the one that doesn't. Tawqir is ta'zim. You have to, give them their place. And if you lose that, then it's very dangerous. And one of the things the Prophet ﷺ said, in the latter days, the youth would rebel against the elders, and there would be no respect. But also the elders have to have compassion for the youth. So it goes both ways. The Prophet ﷺ said, وَلَا يَرْحَمْ مَنْ لَا يَرْحَمْ صَغِيرَنَا, and they don't have compassion for our youth. So this is a two-way street. But this is why knowledge is so important, because without knowledge, people go astray. And the opposite of ilm in Islam is jahal. That's the opposite. And the worst form of jahal is what's called jahal murakkab. And the worst form of jahal murakkab is going into Revelation, the Book of Allah and the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, without the requisite knowledge to interpret them, because they come up with crazy things, and they lead people astray. And the Prophet said, the thing I fear most for my ummah is eloquent, hypocrites, like people that will actually use the religion to manipulate other people. So these sciences are very important. So you have to know usul al-din. Usul al-din, the aslan, you'll see this written in the books for the students. The aslan are the usul al-din and usul al-fiqh. Usul al-din are the foundations of the religion itself. And that means aqidah. And then the aqidah is further categorized into ilahiyat, and nabuwat, and sam'iyat. And so you have to learn your aqidah. So the divinities, the prophecies, and then those things that we only know through revelation. Because we actually have a rational creed. The dominant tradition of the Muslims in the last 1,000 years has been an adherence to a type of natural theology, a rational theology. Although it's based on the Quran and the Hadith and everything, it understands things through reason. How do we know God without recourse to revelation, so that it doesn't become a circular type of reasoning, that our proofs are not simply, because the Quran said so, because the Quran's calling us to look and reflect in yourselves. In other words, it's inspiring your reason to think about things so that you'll come to these conclusions. God, there's a God, and now the question is, does that God communicate? So then we can arrive at La ilaha illallah through reason, but Muhammad Rasulullah, then we also have to look, what are the proofs for that? And the argument is, if you investigate, you'll come to the conclusion that that's also true. So that's usul al-din. And then you have usul al-fiqh, and we'll get into that a little more. But usul al-fiqh, which Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayyah is probably, arguably amongst the Sunni tradition, one of the greatest living usuli scholars, and recognized by the ulama as that, especially in the Maqasidi school. But usul al-fiqh, according to Imam al-Qushayri, he says all of the scholars have positions like a government. So he says, for instance, like the fuqaha are like the ministers. So the jurists are like the ministers of the government. He said the muhaddithun are like and the qurra, they're like the protectors of the treasury, because that's where the storehouses are. But he says the usulis are the generals of the army. Like they're the Greek word for general is strategos, which is where we get our word strategy from. So the usuli is looking always at the ma'alats. And that's why people often, they can't keep up with usuli scholars, because they're ahead. They're thinking, it's like chess and checkers. A master chess player, once that first move's made on his opponent, he's pretty much mapped out the whole game. So if you're playing chess and you do one or two moves ahead, a master chess player is 5 or 6 or 10 or 15, and sometimes even more if they get to the level of, the top people, Bobby Fischer type level. So that's what an usuli scholar, he's looking at the ma'alat, and it's hard for people to see that. And then you have lugha. And lugha is extremely important in the Quran, because one of the things about the Arabic language is we have what's called fiqh al-lugha. So you study nahu and sarf, and that's part of it, grammar, and those are coming. But the first and foremost aspect of language is understanding vocabulary. Now, one of the things about language acquisition is we learn language through being in environments where language is spoken. So we learn contextually. Most people don't learn grammar. They learn, we're all speaking with grammar. We can't communicate without grammar, but most people do not learn grammar. They simply learn words in context. When you get into word derivation, when you get into etymologies, you start understanding the depth of language. You get into the subtleties. So, and then the multiple meanings of words. For instance, fact. If you look at fact, most of us think of fact as an established fact. Well, that's the first primary meaning, but it also can mean an allegation. That's why juries judge facts, because you've got two alternate people presenting. You've got these people saying this happened, and then these people saying this happened. They're both presenting facts as allegations. But a fact, in its primary meaning, is something that simply is, right? It's factual. It happened, or like a historical fact. But it also means allegation. So most of us don't think of fact as allegation, but a lawyer does, because they're using it in that way. And so it's only through the study and acquisition of language. So if you look at just in the Quran, I mean, some examples. If you look at like Surah Ash-Shura, there's a verse in Surah Ash-Shura. It's one of the most important verses in Creed, right? It's the verse everybody learns, right? Yusuf, which one is it? فاطر السماوات والأرض جعل لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا ومن الأنعام أزواجا يذرأكم فيه. Yusuf. ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. So if you look at that verse, that's one verse, right? If you look at the beginning of it, فاطر السماوات والأرض. What's fatir? Ibn Abbas didn't know what that word meant, because it's a very unusual Arabic word. He didn't know what it meant. And he heard two Bedouin arguing about a well. And the Bedouin, he said, Ana fatartu, like I originated it, the well. And he got an understanding of fatir that he hadn't had before. Fatir is the originator, and maybe it's a cognate of father, the Sanskrit for father, Allahu A'lam. But fatir is the originator. So Allah says He's the originator of the heavens and the earth. And then He made you, ja'ala. See, ja'ala is different from khalaqa, even though in the Quran it can mean khalaqa. But ja'ala, because you can have khalaqa and then ja'ala, right? So khalaqa, ja'ala here is He made you, the anfusikum azwaja. He made for yourselves mates or opposites. The zawj is an opposite. So, zawj is always the opposite. So we have two hands. We have a left hand, right hand. And even though they look the same, they're the opposite, right? And the same for the mate. So you have a zawj, which is the opposite. Zawaj is that's why you can't have a zawaj that's not with opposites in Arabic, linguistically. I mean, if you just look at the word itself, it's the mating of the zawj. So you can't have a zawj who's not your opposite. They have to be your opposite. So then Allah says, وَمِنَ الْأَنْعَامِ أَزْوَاجًا. And then in Surah Yasin, Allah says, سُبْحَانَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْأَزْوَاجَ كُلَّهَا مِمَّا تُنْبِتَ الْأَرْضِ. So He creates azwaj from even now we know the flowers and the tree, everything has opposites, right? And so He, وَمِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ وَمِمَّا لَا يَعْلَمُونَ, from their own souls and from what they're not even aware of. Like we didn't know in the atomic world there's opposites as well. Everything is opposites, sama wal ard. And the Quran is filled with dyadic opposite. I mean, there's so many in the samawati wal ard, right? Jannah wa nar, dunya wa akhirah, right? Hayat al-ula wa hayat al-akhirah. I mean, there's so many in the Quran because the Quran is a book of binaries. So once Allah establishes everything is in binaries, then He says, laysa kamithlihi shay. There's nothing like Him. In other words, He doesn't have a binary. There's no binary here. Allah is non-binary. He's the only non-binary. So people that are in rebellion against this creation, and Iblis, obviously, I mean, that's something the devil would really have a field day with, right? To make this argument that you're not made like that you make yourself. In other words, you're a God, so you can choose what you want to be. Whereas we're in submission to Allah. Allah made us what we are. We can't change X, Y, or XX. You can't do that. I mean, you can take hormones and change the physical makeup of your body, but you're still, the essence is the essence. Now look, laysa kamithlihi shay. So Allah says there's no mithal like him, and the ka there is for it's a ziyada. So it doesn't mean there's not a likeness of his likeness, right? It's laysa kamithlihi, laysa mithluhu shay. What is the difference between ka and mithal in the Arabic language? See, ka, if I say Yusuf ka Ahmad, Yusuf is like Ahmad. He might be like Ahmad in his intelligence, but not in any other way. But if I say Yusuf mithlu Ahmad, and that's why the Arab, it means he's just like Ahmad. And this is why the Arabs say mithluhu tamaman, like he's exactly like him. They won't say huwa ka Zayd tamaman. They'll say, even in Ammiya today, they'll say mithluhu tamaman, because the mithal is the essence. There's no essence like God. There's no essence like God. وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. Those are attributes. So the essence of God is what's لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. As far as the attributes go, the only way we can know God is because He's given us, وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. He's created us in His metaphysical image. In other words, we have attributes like hearing and sight. I mean, obviously they're canceled out. They're not like God's hearing or like God's sight. But the only way we can understand that God has hearing and sight is because there's something that there's a tashbih. And this is where you have tanzih and tashbih. Right? So Allah is absolutely, anything that occurs to your mind, Allah is other than that. And yet, and that wow is not atf in the Quran. It's not atf. It means wow al-istinaf. So it's saying yet, like despite that, laysa kamithlihi shay, yet huwa as-sami' al-basir. Right? Like you can understand that because you are sami' and you are basir and you are mutakallim and you are hayy. Right? You are mawjood. So you can understand those attributes because وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. In your own selves, don't you see? So لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ كُلُّ مَا خَطَرَ بِبَالِكَ اللَّهُ خِلَافُ ذَلِكَ. Everything that occurs to your mind, Allah is other than that. And that's absolutely true. And any attribute, any number over infinity in mathematics is 0, right? If you have an equation, you have 8 over a sideways 8, which represents infinity. If you have 8 over infinity, there's no 8. There's nothing. So our hearing is canceled out with Allah, because Allah is all hearing, right? Without organ, He doesn't need udhun. He has no jariha. And yet, how do we understand it except through that attribute? So the essence of Allah is unknowable. We can never know Allah's essence, but His attributes are known through His creation. We know what mercy is because the Prophet even used the example of the foal and the mother. Do you think that mother would throw her child into a fire? And then he said Allah's mercy is greater than hers. So he was showing, here's mercy in the world. Now you can't imagine God's mercy, but here's a glimpse of understanding what mercy is. And so lugha is very important. I mean, there's so many examples in the Quran like that, of just where the word, like khashya. Khashya and khawf are different. You can't say al-Kalbi yakhshani, al-Kalbi yakhafu minni, or I would say akhafu min al-Kalb, right? But khashya is a fear that is always associated with knowledge. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ. It didn't say يَخَافَ Allah. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. Other people fear God. يَخَافُونَ رَبَّهُم. Right? The Quran uses khawf for fear. But khashya is only for the ulama. They're the ones that have khashya. And that's why when Harun tells Moses, إِنِّي خَشِيتُ, أن تقول فرقت بين بني إسرائيل. I had this knowledge that if I let them disperse and start fighting, knowing you would blame me. And so I was just trying to hold them together. He didn't say khiftu, he said khashitu. So khashya, and it's also about manzila, the position of the another one is qawm. In Surah Al-Hujurat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا يسخر قوم من قوم. One people should not mock another people. وَلَا نِسَاءٌ مِّن نِسَاءٍ. And women should not mock women. So women, why is Allah saying qawm and then women? Because qawm are the paternal side. So your qawm are your paternal side. So in order to be from a people, you have to have the father. So like my qawm are Irish people. My mother's side has Greek and Irish. So my qawm are not Greeks, so my qawm are the Irish. And then my father's side, mother's side has Scottish. So I have some nisbah, I have some relationship with those people, but my qawm are Irish people. Those are my qawm, those are my people. And so all the prophets, if you look at them, when they say, Ya qawmi, isti'tafan, they say it as a way of drawing them near. Look, I'm from you, Ya qawmi. I'm from you, except for Jesus. When Jesus talks to Bani Israel, he doesn't say, Ya qawmi, because he doesn't have a father from them. He says, Ya Bani Israel. So that's fiqh al-lugha. And it takes a long time to learn. There's books. Al-Tha'alabi wrote a book, Abu Hilal al-Askari. There's some good books. But fiqh al-lugha is very subtle. And you get into these the farq bayn al-irshad wal-huda. Huda can be used for misguidance as well. Yahduna ila nar al-jahim. It can be used for misguidance. Qawmun yahduna bighayri hadi. Right, in the hadith in al-Bukhari. There's a people that it doesn't mean guide, it means lead astray. So huda can be used for haqq and batil. So, or you have you have ikhlas, ikhlas and nasiha. Ikhlas, the opposite of ikhlas is actually shirk, right? And that's why Surah Al-Ikhlas is the chapter that negates shirk. So what comes out of the udder of the animal, the first milk it's the khullas, it's the pure milk. So it has no tainting. It's not so your perception of tawheed is not tainted with any impurities of shirk, And then also hilm. Some say hilm is the opposite of hilm is jahal, and some say that it's ilm. What's the difference between hilm and ilm? Hilm is a result of ilm. The halim is the one who doesn't get upset. The jahil is the one who gets upset. وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا. Right? Those servants of the merciful who walk humbly with hone on the earth. They walk humbly. They have small carbon footprints. They're humble people. وَإِذَا خَطَبَ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. And when ignorant people speak to them, they say salam. That's from their hilm. They don't get upset. They don't get riled up. Whereas the ignorant people get riled up. And so sakina also is one of those qualities. Anzala sakinatu ala rasuli wa ala al-mu'minin. Like the sakina comes down when the hamiyat al-jahiliyyah is moving, then Allah sends down sakina. So Allah is al-halim. Hilm, look at the word hilm. Halama is the breast, the nipple of the it's called the halama. So Halima Sa'diyah is the one that gave the Prophet ﷺ her breast. Halama is, when the child first comes into the world, it's in a state of haza', right? It's completely terrified. But once it gets the halama, it's at peace now. So that's the Hilm is come, and that's why you can only dream. The Halim is the dreamer. You can only dream when you're at peace. If somebody keeps poking you or an alarm keeps going off, you can't dream. You can only dream when you're in a state of tranquility. So the Halim is at peace. And that's why people can't disturb their peace. They're in the hub. They're in the eye of the hurricane. So things are going on around them. Kana ahlam an-nas. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was the most unperturbable person. You could not disquiet him because he was with Allah. Now, when Allah says, "Alladhina yamshuna," why does he use walking? I mean, it's very interesting. Now you can Google this. They've done all these studies. People that walk a lot, they don't get upset as quick as people that don't walk. Like, we're designed to walk. Allah says, "Bashir al-masha'in." The Prophet ﷺ said, "Bashir al-masha'in," those who walk constantly, bil-dhulam. You know, so walking is very important. Walking was something that the Prophet ﷺ, it was something really important. So anyway, that's lugha. I could go on. I mean, it's one of my favorite subjects, but it's a very fascinating subject in the Quran. When you get into Qur'anic vocabulary and also prophetic vocabulary, like why the Prophet used these, لا تعثوا في الأرض مفسدين. You know, don't have عثو في الأرض. What is عثو? عثو is fasad. It's kathrat al-fasad. You know, like those people that really sow corruption in the earth. And then you have nahu. Nahu is extremely important. People don't realize how important nahu, grammar is. Grammar is very important. Grammar matters. You know, if you say to your kids, "Let's eat grandma," right? You need the comma, right? Or else grandma's the meal. Right? Grammar matters, and we've lost grammar. And this idea somehow that, you know, this idea of prescriptive, you know, that grammar is only prescriptive, descriptive, it's only what people speak, is a very dangerous, it's totally a relativistic view of things. And then the other thing about it is, people that are deprived of standard English are deprived in society. And it's very cruel to make people think that they don't need standard language in any culture, whether here or in Arabia. The people that go the furthest in societies tend to be the people with the strongest language skills. And there are lots of evidence, social science evidence for these things. So grammar is very important, and you have to consider yourself blessed if you grew up in a family where you imbibed it through the parents. But for people that don't, when they have to go to school, it's like learning another language. It's like learning a second language. It makes it very difficult. So they're already handicapped. But it's a barrier that they have to overcome. And you know, the many people have done it. And that's nahu and sarf. And then you have al-bayan. I'll just finish this side, and then we'll get on to the other side tomorrow, I guess. Well, I'll leave bayan for tomorrow, inshallah. So, question and answers. Answers and questions. Kissinger said, "Who has questions for my answers?"
Bismillah. Thank you for that. We've, as usual, have several questions coming in. I'll take one that has to do with rhetoric. Balagha is central to Islam and in the positive. In a Western context, however, rhetoric has come to take a negative connotation. Why do you think that happened? And also, what is the name and author of the book on rhetoric which your grandmother had, which left an impression on you, and why was it impressionable? Okay,
so first part of the question is why is rhetoric so negative? Rhetoric's always been considered, Socrates had concerns about rhetoric because rhetoric is very dangerous, and the sophists, who were basically lawyers at the time of Plato, and they would teach people all these rhetorical tricks to persuade people, because it's the art of persuasion. Today, a lot of it is in the academia, where people use a lot of fallacious arguments. And this idea of critical thinking, you can't have critical thinking without teaching people how to think. I mean, you can't give a course on, for instance, logical fallacies, and you have to understand how arguments work and how they're set up. Logical fallacies, that's material logic, right? It's one, I mean, the students at Zaytuna study these things, which really helps. And then not all logical fallacies are fallacies, right? Appeal to authority is actually not a logical fallacy. It's an argument. It can be a logical fallacy, and it's the weakest of arguments, but it's still an argument. I mean, if I appeal to Imam al-Ghazali as an authority on usul al-fiqh, that's not a fallacious reasoning that I'm using or something like that. But anyway, so, that's part of the problem, is that rhetoric is seen as just a bag of tricks, whereas rhetoric is actually a deep philosophical study that encompasses grammar. I mean, if you look at the material logic is the philosophy of grammar. If you look at the 10 categories, that's the philosophy of grammar. The substance, being, those are nouns. And then you have quantity and quality. Those are attributes, sifat, adjectives. And then you have time and place, adverbs. I mean, Aristotle's getting into a deep understanding, because we are linguistic beings. Our very nature is language. This is what makes us unique. And Allah speaks to us in language. خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ عَلَّمَهُ الْبَيَانِ, right? I mean, he created man and taught him bayan. And that's the word that our scholars chose to use for the science of rhetoric. So, and then politicians manipulate words, So I think a lot of people see rhetoric, but that's the abuse of rhetoric. Every subject can be abused, but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as the Brits say. You have to recognize the importance of these. And there are natural rhetoricians. Like rhetoric, some people have, I mean, you'll find preachers that are natural rhetoricians, especially when you get into kind of street preacher type thing. Rap is a good example of, I mean, a lot of the best rappers have a gift with language. There's a natural rhetorical prowess that they have. I mean, some of them might have studied. They all have rhyme dictionaries. But a lot of them just have an ability with words. And so you'll find those people that have a natural gift for a turn of phrase. But when you study, one of the things that it helps you is realizing that manipulation is part of rhetoric also. So, pathos, you have the three, pathos, ethos, and logos, and then you have kairos. But with pathos, you're dealing with manipulating people's emotions, appeal to emotion, right? That's why they show these horrible pictures of people starving when they want you to give money to elicit some empathy from your guilt. They've done it so much now that people tend to just, look away, because there's a kind of overload with human beings. But rhetoric is very important. It's a beautiful subject, and our ulama were masters of rhetoric. And Jorjani is our one of the greatest rhetoricians of all time, and his theories on meaning and nazam and nathar, they're really stunning things. And then the book, my father gave me a book by Edward Bain. It's called Baines Rhetoric, and it was a book that my mother studied. My great-grandmother studied in Wisconsin in high school. And she has beautiful handwriting, so I have her handwriting in there because she wrote notes on the side. But the thing that struck me the most was the chapter on emotions, when it talks about fear and warning the reader, the student of rhetoric, that politicians often use fear to manipulate you. And because when people are afraid, they'll tend to do things that they would not normally do when they're of more sound mind. People, when they panic, and don't forget, Pan is really a Greek demon, Panic is from the devil. And that's why, Allah says, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا. Human beings are created in panic. Hala' is the worst type of jaza'. And the faza' is, those are all, ayn is such an interesting letter because those all have ayn at the end, it's like, because it's a strong letter, So like the faza' is when something startles you, it's a shock. And that's why al-faza' al-akbar, yawm al-qiyamah, is a big shock for people because they're rebooted. But halu'a, hala' is the worst form of jaza', right? So it's a type of immense anxiety. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا. It has jaza'. And then وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا. He'll withhold. So panic, fear is something, and that's why, I think Roosevelt did a service in that famous speech he gave during the Depression, the only thing you have to fear is fear itself. But you don't have people saying that anymore. You have people, are you afraid yet? There's all these things creating fear. Everybody's afraid to touch now. It's amazing. Like Rumi says, show me the people that don't fear snakes. Like those are the, because the snake is makhluq. Fear the khaliq, don't fear the makhluq. Doesn't mean that you go and just handle a snake. That's not the point. But the point is that your fear is misplaced when you're fearing creation. So, next one.
Thank you for that. Okay, so this person has asked this 4 times, mashallah. So we'll try to get it in there right now. Could our Sheikh elucidate on the meaning of the Mutashabihat and what they mean for ahkam in the Qur'an?
The Mutashabihat, Allah says that He revealed 2 types, the muhkamat and the Mutashabihat. And the muhkamat are the clear verses, and ihkam is an interesting word too, because ihkam is, the muhkam is the hukam of it is clear, it's muhkam. It's perfectly clear. The mutashabihat are those things that are hazy, right? So it could be one way or it could be the other. And so people that have a kind of fitna in their hearts, dissension and strife, they like the things that create ambiguity, not clarity. And so they follow those. So it's almost a litmus test. We'd say a fitness test. Fitna, this, litmus. It's a way of testing people so we can see. Allah doesn't need to see. He knows. But those people that are sick will follow the hazy verses, things that aren't clear. So like Ar-Rahman ala al-Arsh istawa, that's a hazy verse. Because we know it can't mean somebody like doing what I just did when I came here and sat down on it. It can't mean that. Because one, that would mean that God's in a place, that something's holding Him up. That's absurd. But the verse is there, and so we can't deny it. So the Salaf just said, we believe in it, but we're not going to go into details about this. That's called ta'wil ijmali. The later scholars, some of them had ta'wil tafsili, where they got into the details. No, istiwa here means, stawla, like, and then they have their eyes. So, kullu nafsin awhamat tashbiha fa'awwal, awram tanziha. Like every nafs that has kullu nafsin awhamat tashbiha fa'awwal awram tanziha. Like interpret it or just say Allahu alam. I don't know what it means, but I believe in it. So those are examples of, But the Quran is a kitabun mubin, it's a clear book, and those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put down, he says that أَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغٌ, those who have zayg in their hearts, فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ. They follow, what has mutashabihat in it. But the people who are rasikhun, the firmly rooted in knowledge, they say, we believe in it, يَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا. Even in that verse, there's a mutashabih. Is the wow atf or is it isti'naf? So it's right in there. So رَبَّنَا لَا تُزِيغْ قُلُوبَنَا بَعْدَ إِذْ هَدَيْتَنَا وَهَبْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْوَهَّابُ. And that's just, may Allah guide us and not make us people of zayg.
The last question is also a question I'm told this, alhamdulillah, this listener has been watching every night and asking this question every night, and it's brought to my attention. If I can summarize it, he's looking for advice on what verse or verses of the Quran could people who are in tribulation kind of take for like support and a sense of help and aid. And he seems like he's specifically referring to the situation of Muslims in India, but obviously by extension in other places where Muslims are suffering. Any verses that you would like to share that come to mind for consolation or support?
All of the du'as in the Quran are good to do, particularly the last in Baqarah, at the end of Baqarah. That's آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون. That's a very important one. ربنا, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you thabat, thabbit aqdamana, So I think the du'as, and then the du'as of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam an al-tafrij, calling on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. India is a very troubling situation right now, and they're also facing, I think, a Cat 5 cyclones coming up to Bangladesh, and we should pray that, inshallah, it's good to pray for the people there. Hopefully they're spared, that these things, sometimes they dissipate before they actually have landfall. But it's a very serious cyclone now in the ocean. So India is a problem. I read recently the book by Gulvakir, and I was so troubled by it, because he didn't found the RSS, which was the predecessor of the current party that's in power now. He was not the founder of it, but he was the first caliph. He was the first one that took over from the founder, and it's a very frightening book just in terms of his views, and the fact that the book was, the author, the current head of India actually wrote his biography and sees him as a hero. So that was very troubling to see that, because this guy was praising Hitler. He was, it was a really strange book. He has this view of Hindutva, and this idea that Mother India is sacred and only the Hindus can actually set foot on it. So it's not just the Muslims that are under threat now, it's also the Christians and the Jains and the Sikhs and the other groups. And it's really important, I really want to emphasize this. There's a lot of Hindus that are very troubled by this. And it's very important that we don't do the same thing to them that has been done to us, where we get blamed for the extremists amongst us. There are undeniably extremists there, but there are a lot of very decent Hindu people. And so we don't want to see that happen. We actually need to ally with the people that are opposed to this. There's people here that are very troubled by what's happening. So, in Kashmir is another tragedy. And that's a tragedy of it's that classic thing of colonialism, because that was left unsettled, and he actually, the current Modi went against the constitution by, because that's an unsettled issue. But it's, you know, the Punjab, right? It's the 5 rivers. Strategically, whoever controls Kashmir controls India and Pakistan. I mean, that's just a fact. And that's unfortunate for the Kashmiris. You know, they're beautiful people. I've always really had wonderful experiences with Kashmiris. They're really decent people. They're mountain people, you know, they're tough people. But, and they have a deep Islam. And I actually had a experience of a karama from a Kashmiri sheikh, because I met this man, you know, and he had a cane from a Kashmiri sheikh who sent it to me. He started 150 Quran schools in Kashmir, and he sent me his cane, which in some traditions, you know, if a sheikh gives you a cane, it means he's supporting you with his du'as and his prayers. So it was a real blessing to get that. He gave me at the airport, in Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. So I still have the cane. But, you know, we should pray for them and do what we can. And the Indian Muslim Relief Fund that Manzoor Ghori is a really good organization to help. So prayers are important, but also advocacy is important. I mean, this is where activism is very useful in doing what we can to lobby. I mean, the Hindu community has very powerful lobbies in the United States. It's a very powerful community. And like I said, you know, we can't blanket all of them into that. But Hindu nationalism is very strong right now. You're seeing a rise of European nationalism. These are all very troubling signs, because it's good to love your country, but nationalism is a type of collectivism that can actually be a disease. So, I mean, we should be patriotic in that we love our country and want good for our country wherever we're from. But this idea, my country, right or wrong, you know, that's a disease. That's how every empire falls. The end. بارك الله فيكم. اللهم أقسم لنا من خشيتك ما تحول به بيننا وبين معصيك، ومن طاعتك ما تبلغ به جنتك، ومن اليقين ما تهون به علينا مصائب الدنيا، ومتعنا بأسماعنا وأبصارنا وقواتنا أبدا ما أحييتنا، واجعل ثأرنا على من ظلمنا وانصرنا على من عادانا. اللهم لا تجعل الدنيا أكبر همنا ولا مبلغ علمنا ولا غاية رغبتنا ولا إلى النار مصيرنا. ربنا لا تسلط علينا بذنوبنا من لا يرحمنا ولا يخافك فينا. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون، والسلام على المرسلين، والحمد لله رب العالمين. سبحان الله وبحمده، أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت، نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم.